Now it is. Pray with me, please. God, we give you thanks for the gift of this day. There's never been another like it and never will be again, so we give you thanks for the beauties of this season. It's like walking down the aisles of Fort Knox, and we thank you for the beauty of your world, and we ask you to make us wise enough to protect it and guard it for our children and our children's children to the seventh generation. In Jesus' name, amen. So we are going to have two parts of our lesson tonight. I'm going to talk to you for about 15 minutes, and then King is going to redeem the whole thing. So if it's grim and depressing for the first 15 minutes, just wait. King's going to give us all the reason to hope at 7:15 or 7:20, okay?
Go longer if you need to be, if you don't think it's sufficiently grim.
I have three main sources for the material that I collected for my talk this evening. This is Elizabeth Colbert. Every time I see her name, I want to say Colbert, but I'm pretty sure it's Elizabeth Colbert. She's at Williams College and writes for The New Yorker and has made this her life's work. She wrote a book called The Sixth Extinction, more recently than these, which won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago. She's very eloquent and very scientific. My favorite of all of these people is Bill McKibben, who's been following this his entire adult life. Falter and Earth are two great books that he's written about this. And then the other one is called The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. If you're curious and want to pursue this further after this brief presentation tonight. So the news is not good, all right? And the reason the news is not good is because of either something we call climate change or global warming. In general, climate change just refers to the fact that the macroscopic factors that determine our weather are changing in one direction or the other. This has been happening throughout history and prehistory. But climate changes all the time, and it's changing right now. We can put a spin on the concept of climate change by calling it global warming, because that's what's happening right now. If you use the phrase global warming, you are suggesting that human beings have something to do with what's happening, with the climate changing. You know that many scientists refer to the current era in our Earth's history as the Anthropocene. That is to say, the area of time that has been determined by and us, okay, by human beings. And this is what many scientists think is happening. And so what they're referring to is the greenhouse effect. That is to say, sunlight produces heat and radiation. It strikes the Earth. Much of it escapes back into space. And what's happening is that carbon dioxide and methane and other what they call greenhouse gases become like a barrier at the top of our world, at the top of the atmosphere, to prevent much of that heat from radiating back out into space. And thus the world, the Earth, warms incrementally, causing multiple problems for human beings and its animals and its planet. So there are here's what's been going on. Okay, from human civilization is less than 10,000 years old, right? It's something to bear in mind. So we know quite a bit about it back to 2,000 years before Jesus. And what we do know about human civilization during the literate portion of our civilization is that for 2,000 years before Jesus and 2,000 years after Jesus, everything looked the same. Living standards didn't change. If there were not disease and war in your part of the world, you were doing either terrible or okay. But you were doing like your ancestors were doing, okay? And then, of course, the Industrial Revolution comes along. I couldn't believe this. These are Bill McKibben's statistics. He said, I don't know how he figures this out, right? How can you put a figure on a barrel of oil? But this is what he says. And this is, a eureka moment for me. This is why we're in so much trouble. How can you resist a barrel of oil? It represents 10 years of human labor. And so the average American uses about 25 barrels of oil a year. 250 years of human labor. 1 gallon of gasoline comes from 100 tons of decaying plants. When you burn fossil fuels, the byproduct is carbon dioxide. It's a greenhouse gas. It's called greenhouse because, like grass, it traps radiating heat near the earth. 50% of all the carbon ever burned up has been burned up in the last 30 years, and 85% of it is since World War II. Safe levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are about 350 parts per million. Right now, this was 2019. By the way, we had about 4 months of a clear window at the beginning of the pandemic, right? Everything just, pollution just, poof, it went away for 4 or 6 months. And then sometime in the middle of 2020 or towards the end of 2020, pollution kicked back in, and now it's worse than it's ever been. If we use current practices, we'll probably get up to 1,000 parts per million by the end of this century. See, I told you this was going to be grim. I want to, 3 things bother me about this whole thing. Global warming and rising seas, we'll talk about the implications of that, plastic pollution, and then animal death. I'm very interested in the 6th extinction. So as I said, safe levels of carbon dioxide are about 350 parts per million, which is very low when you think about that. That's not a lot of contamination in a pure air, is it? We're at 400 in March of 2019, probably higher than 400 now. The projection is 1,000. At that level, human cognition declines 10%. The Paris Climate Accord target no more than 2 centigrades warming per year. Right now we're at 4 degrees centigrade, which is almost 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Is that right? By the way, this is all cumulative. This is 4 degrees centigrade since we started keeping the, not 4 degrees more a year, 4 degrees total since we started keeping these figures. But what's hard about this is that 272 million years ago, I forget what the name of this extinction event was, but a global warming event of 5 degrees, just a little more than we're doing right now, led to the extinction of almost all life on Earth. We're here by the skin of our teeth. Our distant ancestors, in the terms of microbes and insects and probably rodents, survived so that we're here, but they almost didn't. 1 degree of warming equals 10% decline in yield. The projection for 2100 is 5 degrees warming, or 50% yield of what we're doing now. So what happens with warming are, a couple things. First of all, the sea levels rise. And second of all, weather events become more extreme. So that dry places get drier and wet places get wetter. This is the Colorado River. The Colorado has been described as one of the most endangered rivers in the world. It no longer meets the Gulf of Mexico. It comes up short, I think, miles from where it used to empty into the Gulf of Mexico, but it doesn't anymore because it's too low. It's partly human use, it's partly irrigation, but it's also that it's been a drought in the American West year after year after year. And then you saw what happened in Florida. Wet places get wetter. Hurricane Ian was the 5th strongest hurricane to make landfall ever in the United States, and it also looks like it will be the 6th or the 7th most damaging in terms of dollars. This is just a little joke that I play on people. You've heard me do this before in sermons or here. There are no Buckeyes in Ohio anymore. They're having to move north because it's too hot in Ohio. Likewise, there are no wolverines in Michigan. They're all moving to Canada. So the famous Ohio State Buckeyes are misnamed. The famous Michigan Wolverines are misnamed. That kind of hits me right here. This is Glacier National Park in 1913 and in 2012. The projection is that in fewer than 10 years, there will be no glaciers left. And that's all because of global warming. The temperatures are getting warmer, so the ice is melting. The coral reefs will look like this by, at the earliest, 2050, and at the latest, 2100. The seas are too warm to be hospitable to coral any longer. 25% of the ocean's plants spend part of their life on a coral reef. We've lost 12 Great Britons in the last 40 years. 1.1 million square miles of ice. This is dire. This sea level rise because of the melting of the Arctic and the Greenland ice sheets is so dire because 600 million people live within 10 feet of sea level. So you look at the United States, this is not a surprise. We know about Boston. We know about lower Manhattan. We know about Miami, New Orleans, Charleston, right? There are 23 million pounds of plastic in the Great Lakes every year. Most of it ends up in Lake Michigan because Lake Michigan is a dead end. There's no place to go except for the Chicago River down here, right? The only outlets for Lake Michigan are the Mackinac Straits to Lake Huron and the Chicago River, since they reversed its flow. Very soon there will be more plastics in the ocean by weight than fish. We've lost half of the world's wild animals in 50 years. 1 million species are on the verge of extinction. Anybody want to venture to guess how many species there are? Total, I mean ever, including the ones that have gone extinct since we've been alive? I don't know either. I don't think we'll ever know. And what looks like what might happen is that they'll be gone before we discover who they are and what they are. Here's some good news. A little good news. I'm almost done, King, and then I'll turn it over to you. These are success stories from conservation efforts in North America. All of these species the manatees are actually having a tough time again, but we brought them back from the brink of extinction. They're facing challenges again, but the falcon, the wolf, the brown pelican, I think that's a grizzly bear, whales, bald eagles, and the American alligator. We've all brought them all back from dire danger. So this is the one piece of scripture I wanted to leave with you just as a reminder about our charge from God at the very beginning of this whole story. 6,000 years if you believe the Bible, or 4 billion years if you believe the story of evolution. That when God encountered the human being, who was created, in fact, in the image of God, God put them in charge and said, have dominion over them and take care of them. God said, see, verse 29, it said, see, I've given you every plant yielding seed that's upon the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, and you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. Doesn't it sound like the world was originally intended to be vegetarian? Notice this, that God gives us all plants for food, and God gives the animals plants for food, and it looks as if death and carnivorousness entered creation at the fall, not before the fall. Something to think about. Okay, King. Now, there are many people putting their wise brains to this problem. So lift us back up from the slough of despair. Okay?
Bill, thank you. You delivered when you said this is going to be grim. You're right.
Sorry.
And thank you.
Yeah.
And, for those of you who don't know me, I'm King Poor, and along with Katie Narwell, we are the co-chairs of the Kenilworth Union Green Team. And I also want to extend a special thank you to our friends at Winnetka Congregational Church, who's here, and whoever is online. The WCC and KUC Green Teams have done a number of collaborations over the last couple of years, and I'm just delighted to have another one with Winnetka Congregational. So,
Want me to turn it off? King, is your mic on? Would you flip your switch on?
There we go. Aha, that's better. Okay, for anybody listening at home who's at Winnetka Congregational Church, I will just extend another thank you, now amplified. So, in the bulletin, we described this as the Christian response to climate change. And I'm going to have a little subtext that goes with that, and that is the Christian response to climate change. Despair is not an option. So I'd be pleased to have this to be a conversation with you, and if you have questions, comments, or even polite criticism about anything I say tonight, please jump in. You don't have to wait till the end. And so I'll start with the question. What is it about the Christian response to climate change that means despair is not an option? And thinking about this, a passage from the book of Hebrews came to mind, which I've always liked. And that is that the seen is made from the unseen. And when we think about the Christian response, we think about hope, and we can think about hope that is seen and hope that is unseen. That sounds a little abstract, and so I'm going to illustrate it with a story, and what better place to do it than in the Bible, and in particular, Mark's Gospel, chapter 4. And the setting is this. It's the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus has been out preaching all day, some of the famous parables of the sowing of the seeds. And at the end of the day, he says to his disciples, "Let us go on to the other side." So they get on a boat, go over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and before long there's a great storm. And the wind is howling, and the boat is taking in water, and the disciples look at the stern of the boat, and there's Jesus on a cushion, asleep. And they say to him, "Teacher, do you not care if we perish?" Jesus wakes up, and I love how the Bible describes this. He rebukes the wind and the waves, and just in 3 words, "Peace, be still." And the Bible says the wind stopped and there was a great calm. So when we think about climate change, it's a storm, both literally and figuratively. I mean, you look at what happened in Florida. It's a storm. But in that storm, when we look at this story, this is more than Jesus doing some magic trick to stop the waves. It's about how God is telling us that we're not alone, that we should not feel that we have to solve this problem on our own with our own human capabilities. This is part of what the Christian response is, I believe. And that when we look at the ability of God to work with us, He calls us to be still and to have peace. And so in terms of where we start with the Christian response is not trying to put a to-do list for political action or science. It's first to have the humility to say, we don't have all the answers. We have to trust in something bigger than ourselves. And that means being still, that means looking for the unseen hope that God provides us. And I think that's kind of the lesson of what Jesus did when he was out in the Sea of Galilee there. So that's the unseen hope. But the unseen hope is not an invitation to be complacent. Part of that hope is to take action, and that's where we're going to get to the hope that is seen. Now, there's probably 100 things I could talk about that are hopeful amid all this grimness, but I'm only going to talk about 5 tonight. And of those, we can look at hope on the international level. We can look at hope on the national level. We can look at hope with the state level, with the state of Illinois. We can look at hope on the municipal level on the North Shore. And then finally, we can look at hope right here at Kenilworth Union Church and some of the things we've been doing with the Green Team over the last couple years. So let's start with the international hope. And I'm going to start with a question, and that is, what chemical compound that is common in everyday American life is about 1,000 times worse than CO2? If you're a chemical major, you cannot answer this, but it's, any takers? Well, it is something called hydrofluorocarbons, also known as HFCs. Now, these are not to be confused with CFCs, which anybody who's a little bit older remembers back in the 80s, there was something called the Montreal Protocol, which banned chlorofluorohydrogen, thank you, CFCs. And you remember all these products, like no CFCs, and for those who are old enough, I think and that was, the nations of the world got together in Montreal, and they banned CFCs because it was destroying the ozone layer, so that was a real success story. And then the chemical industries decided, well, we need to do something that will replace the CFCs, which are used in air conditioning, cooling, and also home insulation. I've seen some of these trucks around town with, it's like eco insulation, and then I've made a call. It's like, so you're using CFCs? Yeah, oh yeah, that's not a problem. So the chemical industry decided that they needed to replace the CFCs with these HFCs, and they didn't harm the ozone layer, but it turns out, unintended consequences, they were very bad for global warming. They had 1,000 times more gas trapping properties than CO2. So this has become a serious problem. And here's the hopeful part. Just a month ago, somewhat miraculous, I would even say, the United States Senate voted 69 to 27 to join what's called the Kigali Treaty to drastically reduce the CFCs worldwide. And if this is implemented, as the other nations of the world have come together on this, it will prevent a degree of global warming from taking place. So if we're thinking about something that's really positive, and this did not get a lot of media attention. I found this on page 17 of the New York Times, and it was, it got a little bit of play. But it's big news for a couple reasons. Anytime the U.S. Senate can pass something 69 to 27 these days, I mean, you can't get, what's the flower of the month from the U.S. Senate on something like that. But here it is that the U.S. Senate passed this, and the backstory a little bit is that the industry itself was already moving in this direction. And part of the treaty, too, is that if you don't get on board with this treaty, and there's 137 nations in the world that are on board with this, there will be like trade consequences for this. So this was a major step in the right direction for combating global warming. And so when we think, and I think it's also something that is hopeful that you can get 137 nations to agree on something like this. That's got to be hopeful. And so when we're looking for hope on the international level, that's one example. Then we can turn to the national level. And we've all heard about the climate bill, also known as the Inflation Reduction Act, that Congress passed this past August. And that's vitally important, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But I think the bigger story, or even at least as important as the climate bill, is what the private sector has done over the last 5 or 10 years in leading sustainability efforts. It's remarkable, some of the things that have happened. This has been a great awakening by American industry to take on the challenge of global warming, and there's in every major corporation in the United States now has some kind of sustainability department. I mean, it's just what you do today as a responsible corporate citizen, is you must do something to stand up and show what you're doing. Now, are people doing enough? My view, probably not. But what's the important thing, the hopeful thing, is that a lot of this wouldn't have even have occurred to anyone 10 years ago. Let's take an example of the automotive industry. They're responsible for maybe 1/3 of the United States global emissions. And this is amazing what GM, Ford, and Chrysler, I don't know, what's the Chrysler's new name? The big three have come together and said, we're going to plan that by the year 2030, only 7 years from now, that between 40 and 50% of all the cars we're going to make are going to be electric vehicles. 10 years ago, that would have seemed like fantasy. And here we have the big three taking on something like this. And Ford in particular has really trumpeted the F-150 Lightning. That's the pickup truck, biggest selling vehicle in the United States. They're showcasing this. And once that gets started, it's really going to, it can only take off, and it's going to be a way, once you get people buying the F-150s, and it's very cool. It's got all these different accessories on it. You can, basically live out of it. And so, but once people start buying that, it's just going to continue. So that is a very hopeful sign. And Scott,
you invited questions during your.
This is just like oral argument. I get to get.
So let me ask you. You talked about corporations and the importance of sustainability. Could you talk for a minute about ESG, environmental sustainability governance, and the importance of that these days in terms of corporate governance and shareholder activism?
Yes, great question. I'm going to repeat it. ESG is a term now used in the investing community. I think it stands for environmental sustainability and governance. And if you are investing in stocks, or it's probably anything in the markets, there's been a huge movement now for companies to identify whether they have some kind of ESG certification. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but it has become an increasingly important decision when people buy stocks or do any kind of investment to have the E part of what their company is doing. So that, I don't know that it existed 10 years ago. And so the fact that this is something that is this important, particularly for people who have the wherewithal to invest, because those investment decisions are going to drive corporate policy. And so that's a great question. That when it's that important, investors are really voting with their dollars when they invest. That's how things get changed. Yeah.
The thing that's actually interesting about this, in addition to what you said, is that people are beginning to realize the financial and business consequences of not being considerate and thoughtful about how you're expending natural resources. And one of the things that the Securities and Exchange Commission is doing is proposing new disclosure requirements so that companies are forced to tell the public, the investing public, and all other people that are interested in the company, what kind of consequences are going to impact this company in the future if there's reduced access to fuel generation and things like that. So the economic consequences are kind of beginning to overlap with the ESG spirit of making a better world dynamics.
Yeah, that's a great point, Fritz, is that, as you said, that it's not just doing the right thing, it's economically the smart thing to do. And if you don't do it, there's social consequences, of course, but there's also really severe economic consequences to not doing the right thing by the environment. So, and when the SEC gets involved and starts saying, you got to do disclosures on this, you got to pay if any corporation of any sophistication or size has to pay attention to this. So that's another, I wish I had thought of this. I mean, that's a great hopeful feature by itself, is that, well, but that's see these things, I think it's the cumulative effect of how these things really reinforce each other as time goes on. And so, ESG, the fact that this is something that's important to the investing world now, another reason to be hopeful. And it's not just the auto industry that's taking dramatic steps to really change things. Aviation, another big cause of global warming. They are all about looking into and developing alternative aviation fuels now. I mean, they're not ready yet, but they're on it. Another thing that was very surprising to me was shipping by sea. It's a huge environmental problem. All the ships that move, the big container ships that move all of our trade around the world, huge polluters, just enormous polluters. And there have been any number of articles recently, just in the last year, about innovative ways to really swap out fuel and ways to avoid the really very harmful pollution that you get from the shipping industry. So I mean, they're on this too, and the list goes on and on. Construction, you name it. The new ways to make concrete. I mean, the innovation of the private sector has been remarkable over these last 5 or 10 years. Now, I mean, you're not going to get an argument to me that it's going at a fast enough pace. It probably should go faster. It has to be scaled up more. But in terms of hopefulness, this is right on the ledger that this wouldn't have occurred 10 years ago, and here we are. And I think there's also this cumulative effect as time goes on. So when we look at the national level, there's a lot to be hopeful for there. And then the state of Illinois level. When I think about this, I think about Tower Road Beach, where we would take our kids, and we still go down there often. And when you go down to Tower Road Beach in Winnetka, maybe this is the same as in Gilson or Kenilworth, but if you stand there and you look north, and as the lake kind of curves around there, you look way, way off in the distance, you see a smokestack. And that's the Waukegan coal plant. It's been there. It's been there since the 1920s. It's been spewing coal soot into the atmosphere, and particularly, this gets into the what it's done to the Waukegan community. But it has been operating for almost 100 years until this past June when it shut down. And the reason it did, in part, was because the Illinois General Assembly passed what was what's called the Illinois Clean Energy Jobs Act in July of 2021. And part of that is an effort by the state of Illinois, and this is a very specific goal that's part of the act, to make Illinois net carbon neutral by the year 2050. Now, that sounds like a long ways away, but there are a lot of intermediate steps to get there that are very positive. And among them are the power generation sector is probably after transportation, that's right up there with the sector that is causing so much of the global warming. And Illinois has 13 coal plants. I mean, as you may know, Illinois was a big coal plant and was a big coal state up until fairly recently. I remember even back in the 80s when we lived close to Tower Road, walking to the train, and I could see the coal trucks driving down Tower Road to the Winnetka power plant, and they would dump all that high sulfur Illinois coal right into the bin there on Tower Road. And so we've had a long history of coal in our state, and this bill really took that on and said we're going to find ways to shut these coal plants down, 10 of the 13, by the year in 7 years, in 2030. And we're also going to have, and this is where the clean energy part of the bill, Jobs Act, comes into play, is that we're going to work to retrain people who are working at these coal plants on green energy jobs, and that's a commitment by the state of Illinois. So that is a big step forward. Illinois has been recognized as become sort of a leader on this green energy effort, and it includes a lot of other things: subsidies for electric vehicles, subsidies to help insulate houses. And there's a lot of things in the act that are going to pay dividends as time goes on, and they already have. By the Waukegan plant was one of the first ones to be shut down. So there's lots of issues about the coal ash there, and then we have to work those out. But the fact that this coal plant, so close by, is shut down now. After 100 years, that's a big step and a big reason to be hopeful.
King,
Yeah.
what replaces the energy that the Waukegan plant used to produce?
Great question.
Repeat it so they can hear.
What replaces the energy generated by the Waukegan coal plant? Some of it's going to be renewables, which are have already increased significantly over the last few years. And part of the bill also is money to allow 3 large nuclear power plants to continue operating in the cities of LaSalle, Braidwood, and Byron, which are such large facilities that they provide electricity for like a few million people. So with the renewables and the nuclear, you're going to be able to take up whatever you're losing, and there's no real prospect of brownouts or blackouts or anything like that. I mean, this is something that has been planned as part of this, and was a very careful step on what's going to be closed when. Unfortunately, there's a plant that Winnetka got involved with this is more than this that probably I should talk about. Winnetka got involved is an owner of a Prairie State coal plant in southern Illinois in 2007, and at the time nobody had heard of fracking because there was no real natural gas. I mean, really the only game in town was nuclear, coal. And natural gas was just way too expensive back in 2007. So this plant is still relatively new, and there's a lot of economic reasons it can't be shut down until like 2038 or so it's going to be. But like a lot of these things, there's trade-offs, and this legislation required a lot of different compromises through a lot of different constituencies. It was a lot of hard work to get everybody where they needed to get to, but the net outcome was the fact that you have a bill that's going to shut down most of the coal plants on a timetable that the utilities can live with. That's kind of the thing, Bill, is that the utilities themselves are saying, okay, if we're ramping up our renewables, if we're taking maybe some more nuclear, and utilities can sometimes buy from other utilities, so it's a workable solution. So the Clean Jobs Act is just an example of, again, how much can be accomplished when people are willing to compromise and try to find some common ground on these issues. And that brings us to the reason to be hopeful for the local municipalities on the North Shore. And this, I couldn't help but think of what I was subjected to for about 4 hours today in my home office, and that is the sound of gas-powered leaf blowers. Evanston, Wilmette, Kenilworth, Winnetka, Glencoe all have ordinances that go back Kenilworth is newer, but each of these municipalities have ordinances that have banned gas-powered leaf blowers during the summer months, June, July, August, and September. But they have been routinely ignored by landscapers, really, for the last, for as long as I can remember. And something happened in the summer of 2020. Number one, we were in the middle of a pandemic. So many people are working at home. And these gas-powered leaf blowers, which have a hearing damaging capacity to spew out about 80 to 90 decibels, start becoming a real problem for people working at home. At the same time, the technology for leaf blowers has now shifted where electric blowers have much longer battery life, they have more power, and so they're now reasonable substitutes for these gas-powered blowers. And so I was amazed by the change in the last 2 years, because we've gone from, I thought it was just, well, maybe it's because you're working at home, it's more difficult, but the Winnetka Police Department, and this was something that we worked with other communities to implement, tried to use I think a really innovative carrot as opposed to stick approach, and they contacted landscapers around the North Shore and said, we've got this ordinance, here are all the good reasons to obey it. Would you do something as dramatic as agree to obey the law? And lo and behold, all of the large landscapers in Winnetka, and they're pretty much the same, in the other communities, they signed on this pledge, we called it, to obey the law, and it really resulted in a noticeable decrease. And then this year, I just was talking to the Winnetka Chief of Police recently, and he said that we've never had a better summer in 2022 than we've had this year in terms of compliance. And it's not just the noise of these blowers. Their technology, they have what's called a two-stroke engine. And this is a technology that probably goes back to the 1950s or even earlier. It means that it does not efficiently combust the gas and the oil that are used for these. They have no pollution control device like a car does or a truck. And so you don't have to be a scientist to know how awful these are for the environment. You can smell them right down the street very easily. And they're different. There's lots of different studies now about, they spew out more toxic pollutants than you know, driving a car for so many hours, or it's many times more polluting than a car or an F-150 pickup. And so the fact that we've been able to dramatically reduce the usage of these gas-powered leaf blowers is a real plus for just the air on the North Shore, but also these things. It's the global warming impact too, and so that's another hopeful sign that's come out of municipal government, and really just in the last 2 years, and particularly this past summer. And you want to ask yourself, like, what particular thing could I do to help the environment? Well, this one is like the original low-hanging fruit. If you have a landscaper, you can say, would you use an electric blower, because that's going to help a lot of people in a lot of different ways. So that's a big positive. Other municipal pluses, municipalities are going to recycling demolition and construction debris. I was also pleased to see that the village of Kenilworth is now installing permeable streets, which is a great thing. So a lot of good news on the municipal front. And then that brings us to the last of the 5 areas for hopefulness, and that is some of the things we've done here at Kenilworth Union over the last few years. And Katie and I have been part of this green team going back, probably was the fall of 19, right before the pandemic. And we have a good group of members now. And one of the things that has come out of the green team was what we do with the church's electricity in terms of global warming. The church uses about 220,000 kilowatt hours a year. This is just the main church. The Manson's got its own system. And we have been able to offset about 90% of the church's electrical use by being part of what's called a community solar program that takes electricity from 4 solar farms in northern Illinois, and that in turn offsets electricity that otherwise would have been used to, we still take electricity from Commonwealth Edison, but we are offsetting electricity with renewables. So that's a real benefit in terms of of our carbon footprint as a church. And so that's been a significant environmental savings. And then I think here we are. So Katie has been at the forefront of something else, which I think is a really hopeful way to look at what we could do for the environment, and that is our participation with a Just Harvest, which is a long-time Kenilworth Union benevolence in the Howard Street area. Some of you may remember them as with their Good News Soup Kitchen, and which we have supported probably for 20 years. And then Katie, why don't you say a little bit about what we've done with Just Harvest, and then also green guidelines, and I think there's some good things to talk about there.
I'll start with the picture that's up here. We planted this this year with our landscape company, Ross Burrows, and we had kind of, I don't even know why we ended up in the Robinson Garden, but we did. We were walking around back there and we're like, wow, this area could be really improved. And so we talked to Amy Castino, who's the director at A Joyful Noise, and asked her what she thought about putting in a native garden. And so that's what we did, which is really going to be exciting. We know that pollinators are at risk, and without pollinators, we have no food. So we have all sorts of pollinators out there, and we're hoping that they take root and they will look beautiful next spring and summer. So
I've already seen bees out there.
Yes.
So
We have a lot of milkweed out there. So our hope is that maybe at a coffee hour when once we get through winter, and things pop up. We'll have a coffee hour out there, and everybody can see it. But it's on the what is it, the east side,
yeah.
and there's a nice little walkway, so that's really exciting. And then we've been working at a Just Harvest for 2 years now. This is just this past Friday, and the program is really amazing.
Please explain what that is.
Yes, I will. So they have two gardens that they manage. They actually have kind of another area that's a little bit newer, but this is a school garden, and they help maintain the beds there. Again, there's a lot of native plants and there's a lot of organics too. So we work there with them. And so that on Friday when we went, we had some Boy Scouts and some youth that came with us, and there was a peach tree that had lost a pretty significant branch, and they decided to take it out, which the men there are their interns. They hire interns every year to give them, really life skills. And so those boys and those men worked first, cut it down, and then to get out the stump, which was like a ginormous task. So they were so proud of themselves. This is the other area that we work. So the first time we went was, a year ago, like spring. And it's right near the soup kitchen. And that day we arrived at a parking lot that was pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
And we just went around and we cleaned up all sorts of really bad trash. And we cleared the area. And since then, they have put up a fence, and there's a hoop house there, which a hoop house is basically like it's a greenhouse. And so we cleaned up the area. They kind of put the fence up so that they could keep it safe. A lot of people were sleeping in the hoop house, and there was just a lot of people coming in and taking plants, and so they protected it. And then we helped them build a structure that has just kind of an overhang, because they have weekly kind of farm stand with the produce that they grow. So it's been really amazing to see this area that we first showed up in that was really in bad shape really become a community garden. So it's pretty exciting. And this is from some of the other days that we work. So we do all sorts of things, from spreading mulch to taking out stumps to planting seeds to sweeping. But it's really a really wonderful. It's really wonderful opportunity. And when I think about hope, I just think about those kids, because I don't think I have all the answers. And I know that I'm not going to be the one to make the change. But when we're working in the garden with young people, I think that's where the hope is, that they care enough about the planet and the earth, and they want to spend the time doing that. They didn't have school that day, and they chose to do that. That's where I have hope. So that's been just a really amazing partnership. And last year we also had a tool drive, which some of you might have contributed to fill their sheds. Gail in the back is a contributor to all our work there. So we're really excited. And then the other thing that we started this year was we have green guidelines for the church. So if anybody has events at the church, or for the youth group, or just a joyful noise, we just created kind of a little to-do sheet so people can think about using reusable plates and silverware, which we have at the church. Hope was probably like the first green team member, because she got rid of those horrible styrofoam cups that we had in the coffee hour.
Before we had a green team.
Yeah, before we had a green team, she started that effort. So those little steps, I think, make a big difference and just makes people aware. So I'm just really all about awareness and education. So we have lots of different ideas on that green guidelines. So hopefully now when people reserve a room, they get the guidelines to know that this is really important to KUC. The other thing I would have added to just what's happening locally is almost every community now is composting in some way, shape, or form. And we know that by putting organics and food in landfills, it creates methane, which is more toxic than carbon dioxide. So just by composting, that can make a significant change. So almost all communities now have some type of composting. So check it out if you're not already doing that. Yeah. Anything else that I missed?
That's pretty comprehensive.
That's pretty
So
comprehensive.
Yeah, that is. What questions do you have for King or for Katie?
Thank you, Katie.
So you saw this thing that was in the Christian Century a couple of months ago, 40 ways for a church to become green, which I thought was very creative. One of the items here was hold an annual clothing swap. I don't know about a clothing swap, but somebody who was here last Monday night sent me a nice little check. It says thank you for doing this, and this person said we miss rummage a lot. So, I mean, I just thought that was a coincidental thing. That 40 ways to help your church be green, and this woman saying we really should reintroduce rummage, and I get her point because that's the greenest thing Kenilworth Union Church does to keep literally tons and tons and tons of material out of landfills every year. And then we sell it to our neighbors, and they take it to another rummage sale, and the rummage sale sells it to somebody else. It just keeps circulating through the human community. Sorry, what questions do you have for King or Katie?
Katie, are we composting here at church?
You know, we have. We have done it like we did it one summer when they had Vacation Bible School. It was kind of an earth theme. And we've talked about it, but we don't feel like at this point we're generating enough food waste. So I think when we get back like to our Wednesday luncheons and the Wednesday night youth group dinners, it's definitely something that we should consider. So we have some people that will take stuff home to their own compost bins. But
Well, because Winnetka just started sort of composting.
Oh, yeah.
They've
Yeah.
put buckets in 3 or 4 different areas in Winnetka where you can, which, yeah.
Lisa and I are responsible for the liturgy every Sunday morning, and I was intrigued by one of the suggestions on here. Go to a paperless liturgy. Ditch your paper bulletins. Or if you have to use a bulletin, Catholics actually do this a lot. Roman Catholic churches do this. They have a missal, and they just have a little slip saying it's, it's the 30th Sunday in ordinary time. We're going to do these hymns. This is the scripture. This is the sermon title. But everything else goes from week to week. What do you think about that? Could you use just the screens for worship on Sunday morning? If we get them right. Last week we didn't get them right. But if we get them right, could you forget your paper? Pardon me, Katie?
It's not that much.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They could do it on their phone. Thank you for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that might be a losing battle, Hope.
Yeah.
No screens.
Oh.
Katie, thank you for involving the church's children and teens in our effort.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
8 o'clock on the dot. Thank
so-
you. And those of you who have been here 4 times, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
This is our series, Battalions of Controversies. We've only looked at 4. I don't know what we're going to do next semester after the holidays, but something. So please look for other
Yeah.
things that we're going to be doing.
And, yep,
Thank you, King. Thank
Yeah.
you, Katie.
yep. Despair is not an option. So that's,
Yeah.
and don't give up. That's,